Graduation was supposed to be the one day my family finally showed up for me, not with excuses, not with backhanded jokes, but with pride. I had imagined smiles, photos, maybe even a moment where my sister looked at me like I mattered. Instead, it ended with my graduation cake smashed onto the floor, my nephew laughing while everyone froze, and a single sentence that burned deeper than the mess at my feet. When he told me to eat it off the floor, something inside me snapped, and I realized this wasn't just about cake. It was about years of humiliation ending right there. My name is Dana, and nothing about my graduation came easy. While my sister had support, babysitting, and constant praise, I worked nights, studied mornings, and learned early that in my family, achievement only mattered if it came from the right person. I paid my own tuition, commuted on a failing car, and missed birthdays because shifts couldn't be swapped. Every time I tried to share good news, my sister redirected the conversation back to her son, how gifted he was, how special, how everyone needed to accommodate him. Still, I kept going. Graduation wasn't just a ceremony to me, it was proof that I survived being overlooked. When my parents finally agreed to attend, it felt like a fragile victory. My sister insisted we celebrate afterward with a small family gathering at her house. I hesitated, but she promised it would be nice and even ordered a custom cake with my name on it. That cake mattered more than it should have. It was the first thing anyone in my family had ever done purely to celebrate me. I showed up holding my cap, my gown folded carefully in the car, rehearsing polite smiles in case old patterns resurfaced. I told myself to be grateful, to stay calm, to not expect too much. What I didn't know was that my sister's son had been watching the whole build-up with narrowed eyes, already irritated that the attention wasn't on him. And no one, not my parents, not my sister, thought that was something worth addressing. The house was louder than I expected, packed with relatives who barely knew what I had graduated in. They hugged me awkwardly, asked surface-level questions, and drifted away before I could answer. My sister stood near the kitchen, already irritated, snapping at people while pretending everything was fine. Her son, 16 and fully aware of his power, leaned against the counter, scrolling on his phone like the whole event inconvenienced him. When the cake came out, everyone gathered around. White frosting, gold lettering, my name spelled correctly for once. I felt something swell in my chest that I didn't trust yet. Cameras came out. My sister told me to stand closer, then barked at her son to move so he wouldn't block the shot. He rolled his eyes dramatically. I should have noticed the tension then. The way he stared at the cake, jaw tight. The way my sister ignored it, laughing too loudly to fill the space. When someone suggested I cut the first slice, I stepped forward, hands shaking just slightly. That's when he moved. It happened fast enough that no one reacted in time. One sharp shove from behind, deliberate and forceful. The cake slid, tilted, then hit the floor frosting side down. Gasps filled the room. I stumbled forward, barely catching myself before I fell too. For a second, there was silence. Then he laughed. Not a nervous laugh. A proud one. I turned around slowly, disbelief flooding every nerve. My nephew was grinning, eyes bright, like he'd just pulled off something impressive. Frosting splattered his shoes. My sister opened her mouth, then closed it again, clearly calculating how to spin this. Before anyone else could speak, he pointed at the ruined cake and said it. Go on, he sneered. Eat it off the floor. The room froze. My parents stared at the mess, not at me. Someone laughed uncomfortably, then stopped when no one joined in. My sister finally reacted, not by apologizing, but by sighing like I'd inconvenienced her. He's just joking, she said quickly. Don't be so sensitive, Dana. Something inside me cracked clean in two. This wasn't shock anymore. It was clarity. Every dismissal, every excuse, every moment I was expected to swallow humiliation so her son could feel superior, it all lined up perfectly. I looked down at the cake, then back at them. No tears. No shaking. Just calm. Because I finally understood something they never expected me to realize. I didn't need their approval, and I didn't have to stay. I straightened my gown, picked up my cap, and took a step back. That single step told them more than any shouting ever could. And that was the moment I decided this would be the last time my success was treated like entertainment. No one moved at first. My sister stared at me like she was waiting for an apology for ruining her moment. My parents avoided my eyes entirely, whispering to each other as if silence might undo what had just happened. My nephew crossed his arms, smug, clearly expecting me to either explode or cry. When neither happened, his smile faltered. I quietly walked to the bathroom, rinsed frosting from my hands, and looked at myself in the mirror. The person staring back didn't look broken. She looked finished. I returned to the living room, picked up my purse, and thanked everyone for coming. The confusion on their faces was almost comical. "Dana, wait," my sister snapped, following me to the door. "You're being dramatic. He's a kid." "He's 16, I said calmly. "And you taught him this was acceptable." That made her defensive. She raised her voice, accusing me of holding grudges, of being jealous, of always needing attention. My parents finally stepped in, not to defend me, but to ask me to calm down. That was the moment I realized they still didn't see me as someone worth protecting. So I left. No slamming doors. No yelling. Just the quiet sound of consequences beginning. Driving home, memories flooded back with painful clarity. Birthdays forgotten. Achievements minimized. Every time my sister needed help, I was expected to show up. Every time I needed support, I was told to handle it myself. The cake wasn't the first insult, it was just the first one I refused to absorb. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was how much power I had quietly built while being underestimated. While they were focused on appearances, I was focused on stability. I had taken a job my sister mocked for being boring, climbed steadily, and invested carefully. I owned my apartment outright. I had savings. I had options. And most importantly, I had boundaries. By the time I got home, my phone was already lighting up. Texts from relatives telling me to forgive and forget. A voicemail from my mother asking me to be reasonable. And then a message from my sister that made me stop cold. She demanded I reimburse her for the cake. That was it. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I sat down, opened my laptop, and drafted a single email, not emotional, not angry. Just factual. It outlined exactly what I would no longer tolerate, what access they no longer had, and what consequences would follow if those boundaries were ignored. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. The next morning, my sister showed up at my apartment unannounced. She banged on the door like she owned the place. I opened it just enough to speak. "You embarrassed us," she hissed. "You owe my son an apology." I smiled, not out of humor, but out of relief. Because this was exactly what I needed. "No," I said simply. She scoffed, launching into a tirade about family loyalty, respect, and how much she had done for me. I let her talk. When she finally paused, I handed her a printed copy of the email I'd sent the night before. Her expression changed as she read. Confusion. Anger. Panic. She hadn't realized how much she relied on me, financially, logistically, quietly. The babysitting. The emergency loans she never paid back. The utilities I covered when she was short. All of it ended, effective immediately. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You can't just cut us off." "I already have," I replied. She tried to laugh it off, then tried to threaten me, then finally tried to cry. None of it worked. When she realized I wasn't backing down, she left without another word. And for the first time, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Over the next few weeks, the fallout was swift. Relatives stopped calling when they realized guilt wouldn't work. My parents tried to mediate, but only if I apologized first. I declined. My sister struggled without the support she'd taken for granted. My nephew learned, painfully, that disrespect had limits. I didn't celebrate their discomfort, but I didn't rescue them either. Because this wasn't revenge. It was self-respect. And the silence that followed wasn't loneliness. It was freedom. The shift didn't happen all at once. At first, they treated my silence like a tantrum that would pass. My sister sent messages pretending nothing had changed, asking for favors, forwarding schedules, hinting at emergencies. I ignored every single one. When that didn't work, the tone changed. Relatives started reaching out individually. Not to apologize, but to gather information. They wanted to know if I was really cutting everyone off or if this was just a phase. I answered honestly and briefly. Yes, I was serious. No, I wasn't negotiating. That's when the whispers started. Family gatherings felt different without me there. Conversations stalled. People noticed the absence of the person who used to smooth things over, pay quietly, help without asking. My parents began to feel the strain too. They called more often, their voices less confident, asking how long this had been building. I didn't explain. I didn't justify. Because the truth was simple, I had given them countless chances to treat me with basic respect, and they had chosen not to. The moment they understood that I wasn't coming back to fix things for them, that was when the panic set in. A month later, my cousin hosted a large family dinner. I hadn't planned on going, but she reached out privately and promised it would be neutral territory. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I wanted closure, not reconciliation. The tension was immediate when I walked in. Conversations dipped. Eyes followed me. My sister stiffened across the room, her son suddenly very interested in his phone. No one mentioned the cake. No one joked. Midway through dinner, my aunt raised her glass and congratulated me on my graduation, late, awkward, but loud enough that everyone heard. The room waited for my response. Thank you, I said calmly. I worked hard for it. That should have been the end of it. But my sister couldn't help herself. She muttered something about overreacting and holding grudges. I stood up slowly, heart steady, voice even. I didn't overreact, I said. I reacted appropriately to being humiliated and dismissed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult anyone. I simply listed facts. The cake. The comment. The lack of apology. The years of entitlement. The room went silent. For the first time, people weren't hearing her version. They were hearing mine. And they believed me. After that night, things changed fast. Invitations stopped going exclusively through my sister. People contacted me directly. Apologies came quietly, from cousins, aunts, even my father, though his was hesitant and incomplete. My sister, meanwhile, unraveled. Without my support, cracks showed everywhere. Bills stacked up. Promises she'd made fell apart. Her son struggled when teachers and authority figures didn't tolerate the behavior she'd always defended. For the first time, she couldn't shield him from consequences. She called me late one night, voice tight, asking if we could start over. I told her the truth. I'm not interested in starting over, I said. I'm interested in moving forward without being disrespected. She accused me of punishing her son. I reminded her that she had taught him how to treat people, and now the world was responding. That conversation ended with her crying. Mine ended with relief. Because I finally understood something important, walking away doesn't make you cruel. It makes you unavailable for abuse. Life got quieter after that. Cleaner. I focused on my career, my friendships, my peace. I celebrated milestones without bracing for sabotage. I stopped shrinking to keep others comfortable. Sometimes I thought about the cake, not with anger, but clarity. It marked the exact moment I chose myself. They didn't lose me because I was dramatic. They lost me because they underestimated how much I was willing to protect my dignity. And I never regretted that choice. 3 months after the graduation incident, my sister tried one final move. She didn't call. She didn't text. She showed up publicly, posting a long message on social media about family betrayal, vague enough to make her look wounded and generous, specific enough that everyone knew it was about me. She talked about sacrifices. About how she'd always tried to include me. About how some people can't handle jokes or disappointment. She never mentioned the cake. Or the words her son said. Or her silence afterward. At first, I considered responding. I drafted a reply in my notes app, line by line, dismantling every lie. But halfway through, I stopped. I realized something powerful. People who mattered already knew the truth. People who didn't, never would. So instead of engaging, I posted a single photo from my graduation, me alone, smiling, cap slightly crooked. The caption was simple. Hard-earned. No apologies. That was it. The response was immediate. Messages of support. Congratulations from people who'd been quiet before. Even strangers who sensed something deeper behind the words. My sister deleted her post within hours. She never tried to rewrite the story again. I heard updates through the grapevine, though I never asked. My sister struggled more than she admitted. Without a fallback person to clean up messes, things compounded quickly. Missed payments. Missed deadlines. Missed chances. Her son transferred schools after disciplinary issues stacked up. Teachers didn't laugh at his jokes. Authority figures didn't excuse his cruelty. For the first time, he wasn't protected by family silence. My parents reached out occasionally, holidays, birthdays, but always cautiously now, like they were afraid of crossing a line they could no longer see. They never apologized directly. Instead, they asked about my job. My apartment. My plans. They were learning how to interact with me as an adult, not an obligation. And I let them, on my terms. Distance didn't destroy my family. It revealed exactly who they were without my labor holding everything together. Closure didn't come with an apology or a dramatic reconciliation. It came quietly, on an ordinary Tuesday, when I realized I hadn't thought about the cake in weeks. I woke up without dread. I celebrated achievements without bracing for mockery. I made plans without calculating who might sabotage them. My life expanded in ways I hadn't noticed were restricted before. I learned that love without respect isn't love, it's control. That family doesn't mean access. And that boundaries don't require permission. People like my sister mistake endurance for weakness. They assume silence means acceptance. They rely on others to absorb their worst moments so they never have to change. Walking away didn't make me cold. It made me honest. And honesty is something they were never prepared for. I didn't win by humiliating anyone. I won by choosing peace over proximity. I used to think strength meant enduring whatever the people closest to you decided to dish out. I thought it meant swallowing comments that stung, laughing off disrespect so the room wouldn't feel awkward, and convincing yourself that if you just tried harder, loved better, stayed quieter, things would eventually change. That belief kept me small for a very long time. It taught me to normalize behavior that should have never been acceptable and to doubt my own reactions whenever someone crossed a line. What that moment with the cake showed me wasn't just how far my sister's entitlement had gone, it showed me how deeply I'd been conditioned to accept it. The shock wasn't that my nephew said what he said. The shock was how many times I'd been treated that way before and told myself it didn't matter. That day forced me to see the pattern clearly, without excuses, without nostalgia softening the truth. People like to say, that's just how family is, as if shared blood somehow cancels out accountability. But family dynamics don't exist in a vacuum. They're built, reinforced, and protected by the choices people make every day. When someone repeatedly disrespects you and faces no consequences, they don't learn compassion, they learn permission. And when everyone else stays silent, that permission becomes policy. Walking away was terrifying at first. There's a particular kind of fear that comes with choosing yourself when you've been taught your worth comes from what you provide to others. I worried I'd be labeled dramatic, cold, selfish, ungrateful. And the truth is, some people did label me that way. But something surprising happened alongside that fear. The moment I stopped explaining myself, the moment I stopped trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding me, the weight began to lift. Silence, I learned, can be incredibly revealing. When I stopped fixing things, covering gaps, smoothing tensions, the true structure of my family became visible. Relationships that relied on my effort collapsed quickly. Others adjusted. A few even grew. That wasn't cruelty on my part, it was clarity. Healthy connections don't require one person to bleed quietly to survive. There's a myth that cutting contact or creating distance means you're angry forever. In reality, it often means you're finally calm enough to think clearly. I wasn't driven by rage. I was driven by exhaustion. By the realization that love without respect is just obligation wearing a softer name. And obligation is a terrible foundation for any relationship. I also learned that closure doesn't arrive wrapped in apologies. Sometimes it comes disguised as indifference. The day I realized I didn't need them to understand why I left, that was the day I was truly free. Their confusion was no longer my responsibility. Their discomfort was no longer mine to soothe. I had already done more than enough of that in silence. If you're listening to this and seeing pieces of your own life reflected back at you, I want you to hear this clearly: you are not required to tolerate humiliation to keep the peace. Peace that demands your dignity isn't peace, it's control. And the people who benefit most from your silence will always be the first to criticize your boundaries. Leaving doesn't mean you hate them. It means you finally love yourself enough to stop negotiating your worth. It means you're choosing a future where your milestones aren't overshadowed, where your achievements aren't minimized, where your joy isn't treated like an inconvenience. It means you're done teaching people how to treat you by accepting less than you deserve. I didn't become someone else when I walked away. I became more myself. More grounded. More honest. More protective of the life I worked so hard to build. And that version of me isn't available for ridicule, dismissal, or casual cruelty anymore. That cake wasn't just dessert on the floor. It was the last symbol of a role I was done playing. And once I stepped out of it, everything else finally fell into place. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this: the moment you stop tolerating disrespect is the moment your life begins to expand. You don't owe anyone continued access to you just because they're used to having it. You owe yourself safety, respect, and a future that doesn't require you to shrink. And once you choose that, really choose it, there's no going back.